here. Hey ladies, welcome to our No Bad Days show, Simple Wellness for Women. I'm Jolene Fisher, your host, and every episode of the No Bad Days show will give you a view into the life of another woman. She will share her story, her triumphs, her struggles, and the lessons she's learned along her path. My goal as a host is to bring topics to you that are relevant and encouraging because I want you to be inspired to be the hero of your own story. This is why I introduced you to the brave women on the show, because they're doing hard things and they are also living out the meaning of the No Bad Days motto. So today we're talking to Keiran Reynolds, and she currently holds the title of Miss Washington for America 2019, and her platform is overcoming the stigma of mental illness. I had the pleasure of coaching Keiran to the national stage where she won Miss Congeniality. Congratulations.
Thank you.
If you check out her Instagram at Miss_Washington_2019, you can see her rocking this amazing seagull's costume with the feathers and everything. It's so cool. She's also a mother to a 7-year-old daughter named Zoe, and she is happily in a relationship with an amazing man. And so she's just living a fun life. But today we really want to talk about this stigma of mental illness and Keiran's platform. And she's really passionate about it. So Keiran, why don't we hear from you first of all? Tell us a little bit about your background and where you're from, and just get to know you a little bit better.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. And everyone watching, thank you so much for being here today and letting me share my story with all of you. So I was born in Brighton, England at the age of 5. My parents divorced and my mom remarried an American. And I grew up in the States and became an American citizen. And so it gave me a very diverse life. I was traveling at a young age and experiencing a lot of different culture with that. And so there was a lot of opportunity there. I grew up as very much a tomboy. As far as anything kind of glam wasn't really my style. I've always been big into skiing and rock climbing and mountain biking, and things that people would say are tomboy activities. I don't like to say that because I'm a female and I love them. So I like to say I'm an athletic female. So pageantry is never something I had even considered as a young person. It wasn't really until I got older and I realized that I had a lot more control over my life than I recognized at the time. And so I started making lists of goals and things I wanted to do in my life, and started to put myself in situations that I might have found scary at the time, but felt very hopeful that if I could do these experiences, I'd come out of them much stronger and more well-rounded, I would say.
Yeah, awesome. So tell us a little bit about your dad. You've talked to me a little bit about him and some of the. Are you talking about your stepdad or your biological dad when we were talking?
Sure. So that was my biological father. My father grew up in England. My family's English, and so I didn't get to know him a ton growing up, except for the summers. I would go over there and spend a little bit of time with him. But we never had a kind of relationship like you would see here in the States, where it's just a lot of an abundance of emotion or conversation. We've always had more of like a formal relationship. And quite recently, what I realized was my platform that I was representing really was a big deal to my family. And I started this journey for myself. So the reason I did pageantry is I wanted to get better with having better relationships with women, because I had grown up around so many males in the hobbies that I did. It just happened to land that way. And I really wanted to be a better female friend. And so I thought pageantry would be a great way to network with women and learn about women, but also to give myself a chance to learn about something that had really been a burden my whole life. And that was the fact that I have really bad seasonal depression and anxiety and overall just depression in general. And for the longest time, I remember not telling anyone because I felt that I had a very good life and other people had problems going on, and therefore it wasn't depression that I was going through. It was more of just not being happy, or not choosing. It felt like it was a choice, and the fact of the matter is it wasn't. Someone once said to me, would someone who's diabetic apologize for being diabetic? And that really hit home for me, because what I realized was this monster that I'd been carrying my whole life of these heavy feelings of not wanting to get out of bed, or really having people take my energy really quickly were all things that I could fix with a better environment. And I do take medication and really taking care of my well-being. And the more I started to open up about it, I realized so many other people were suffering with this issue. My sister was struggling with it. I had never known until I'd opened up about it myself. And my father, his whole life, has really struggled with mental illness. And it's a shame because a lot of people who have it really keep it private because they feel ashamed.
Right. And how have you seen the privacy of it affect people's lives versus the ones that have come forward and said, I feel like I have a problem here and I want to fix it? Because there's kind of two sides to that. The people who remain silent, what have you seen happen to their lives versus the ones that have opened up?
Right. My father and I are really new on this discussion. In fact, it was only about a week ago that I finally had the confidence to have this discussion with him. And I'm at this place where everything's very big and open to the public. And I am trying to speak about this discussion, or I'm trying to talk about this topic, where my father, he has this idea that he's handled it his whole life. And so he has his form of doing it. But the interesting thing was what our partners had to say about us. And the thing is my partner knows that I have anxiety, depression. Therefore, when I go into what's called funks, some people call them bad days, whatever you've decided to call that moment where you really just check out and your brain doesn't feel like your brain anymore. You need a good support system because you do go to really dark, heavy places. It's not my personality, but it just happens. And so to be able to have support from friends and a partner is huge because it helps them also understand that these feelings that I'm exerting aren't because of them. So then my father's partner, her opinion on it was very different because they don't talk about it, that it really is heavy on her and it weighs on her. And so the two reasons why I think it's important to open up is, one, the people around you should be able to have an understanding of what's going on, so you're not burdening them with your illness, but also for yourself to be able to have support and patience and understanding during those moments of, really dark sorrow and heavy times. And the fact of the matter is, even with medication, it still will happen to me, but now I can message my friends and say, I'm going through a funk this week, and everyone knows to just take it a little bit more easy. I need to get into some sunshine. I should probably get outside. Positive music, eating healthy. Those are all things that can help. And I think if you can have those discussions, I think you'll have a lot better support. And that's why I think it's so important, because otherwise you're kind of just locked in a room wondering what's wrong with yourself.
Right. It's interesting too, because in the last interview I just did with Renee, she said that community was her way of getting through the cancer. And whether she lived or died, it was community that just helped hold her together throughout. And would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. I think, I've done a lot of research on happiness, and what really sticks with me is what helps people during a time of dark days is finding purpose. And purpose can be through your faith, or it can be through community, or it could be your family, it could be all three. But I think to make sure that you have purpose is very important. And I think that's what she means with the community, is it kind of gives you something to look forward to, and you get a lot of positive feedback. And so when you have that sort of purpose, it helps get over those heavy moments.
Yeah. What are some of the purposes that you're living for right now?
Sure. Yeah. So my daughter is a huge reason for me to be open about this, because it's something that she might experience. I think in today's society with social media and all these extra pressures, I think it doesn't help the mental well-being. And so we have to be even more open about how we can protect our hearts and our minds, because there's just this constant blast of fake lives, in a sense, right? You always see online is a lot of people's best days, not their bad days. And, I don't want to see everyone's bad days either, but at the same time, you can forget and think, wow, my life's really awful. Look, so-and-so's doing X, Y, and Z. And so I think it's really important to talk to young people about it. So my daughter was the first thing. The second thing is my partner, right? Because he needs to be patient and understanding of what's going on with me, and I shouldn't feel uncomfortable talking to him about it. And then the other reason was community, is because I felt like, wow, a lot of people look at me and have an idea of who I am and what my life is because I portray it in a certain light. But at the same time, I think it would be very unfair for people to think that that's all of me, because the fact is while I'm very active in my community and I'm a very positive person, I struggle with anxiety and depression on the daily. And I remember the first time where I finally kind of got my head around it, it felt like I could breathe for the first time. As a child, my mom had always told me that it was growing pains and I was just going through these emotional growth spurts. And so for the longest time, I always had excuses of what these moments were. And it wasn't until my 30s that I realized I wish I had started sooner, because I had spent such a long time suffering through it instead of knowing how to handle it in a way that was much healthier for myself and everyone else.
Right. And I think what's scary is that the number one cause of death among children today is not young children, but ages 12 to 18-ish, around there. And I just learned this from going to Daybreak, and they told us this statistic is the number one cause of death for those age ranges is drug overdose. And the number two cause of death is suicide. Mm-hmm. But there's a side to this facility called Daybreak that's the ENT side, where they do the mental illness intake, and then the people have to be of right mind before they can go through the detox and the part of overcoming the addiction. And so mental illness seems to be at the root of all these issues, right? And you don't usually, well, and there can be addiction without mental illness for sure, because that's definitely the larger side of Daybreak. But what are you seeing in today's society that really is getting you purposeful toward wanting this to be your main platform, besides just for yourself and for your immediate family? How do you want this to move forward into the greater society as a whole?
If we look at statistics, it's becoming more of an issue. And I think that mental illness is kind of one of the last health things to be looked at, because it's the most difficult, because it's not so visual. If you have a broken bone, you fix your bone. But if your mind is imbalanced, because it's not something you can visually see, it's so easy to categorize it into things that it's just not. This person, could be crazy. Well, that's not true. Or this person's an alcoholic. Well, I'm mentally ill. I struggle with depression. I don't drink alcohol, and when I do, I'm not addicted to it. So there's all these things that people think it is, and all that does is keep people from opening up about it. And if people can't open up about it, then they can't go and get the help that they need. And really, that just comes down to being damaging to the community, because if you have people who are working in your company, or you have people at your church, or wherever they are in life, and they can't open up about these things, you're not really getting their full potential. And life is this precious thing we kind of have one shot at, and it just seems more like a waste that we can't let people just open up and blossom and have that positive support that they need. And because mental illness is so tricky, for the longest time, I think society, we've just pushed it aside. But the fact is, it's been around forever, and there are definitely tools that can help. And I think talking about it on the level of importance that someone has cancer, or, someone has diabetes, or whatever a condition is, it's just as important, because it's someone's well-being. And anyone who's lost a family member or friend or child or whatever would agree that it's not a light topic. It's a life or death topic. I've thought about suicide many of times, and if anyone who knows me personally knows my personality, I'm the most outgoing, positive person. It's not that I'm necessarily seeking attention. It's just a very heavy feeling that happens, that your mind goes into places that you don't necessarily want to go. And if caught on the bad day with the wrong people around you or the wrong circumstance, it can end up being very tragic. And so my goal is to get out there and talk about it, so that hopefully these numbers become less, because my goal is that people talk about it, therefore getting the help that they need. And that's the big part about breaking stigma for me. There's a lot to be done. It's just kind of started. I know that there's different groups out there. I'm excited to work with NAMI, and there's facilities and things, but I just want people to not categorize people with mental illness as something, whether it be crazy or, people who just like drama, because at the end of the day, this doesn't select a guy or girl or of upper class or lower class. This is something that happens to everybody, just like any other disease or illness or tragedy. It can happen to anyone.
Yeah, and from what I know, and you can tell me more about it too, because I personally haven't experienced depression or anxiety, but I've had it affect my family pretty severely in the last year. And I won't get into detail about that because of their own privacy, but I feel like it's really a chemical imbalance, and there's things in their environment, along with maybe how they're living their lives and the food they eat, to the sleep they're getting, to the disruption in their family, to all sorts of circumstances. So can you kind of talk to that a little bit as to some of the causes or that you're seeing in today's society, and how we as parents can maybe help our kids?
Absolutely. I can give you a personal story, and I'm my hands are sweaty just thinking about it, because, obviously to open up, there's that fear of judgment. But the fact is this is what I've signed up for. So here goes. So here's a great example of like what I would call a funk. I had a photo shoot set up with this photographer, and I was so excited. We had spent all this time planning this photo shoot. And then the day of the photo shoot, I woke up and it felt like someone had murdered my child's school. I mean, it was just an amount of such a huge amount of pain and heaviness that it's so hard to describe, that getting out of bed or even doing anything was so difficult. And here I had to, I didn't even show up. I didn't even call the photographer. I didn't do anything responsible, because my head and my mind and who I was just in a whole nother place. And it was humiliating, right? The next day to call and express what had happened, because it made me feel irresponsible. It made me feel like a jerk. And so these things can affect people, whether they're, going to work or going to school. It can really burden their lives. And that was one example of how it had burdened my life. And so what I would say is, if this is something that's happening to you, learn about your mental well-being. So what I would do is I would make a list of things that you recognize bring you a lot of happiness. So for me, I really need a lot of good sunlight. Really helps. My surroundings seems to really affect my mental well-being. Working with you, learning about food and nutrition is huge. I take medication, which I remember the day that I took medication, I think 4 weeks after I had been on the medication, I remember waking up one day and feeling peace, like nothing. I didn't feel sorrow. I didn't feel over anything. I just felt peaceful. And so that was very helpful for me. So I think, if you're going to do the medication route, really speak to your medical provider and figure out something that works for you. But don't just think that taking medication is going to change everything, because unfortunately that's just not how it is. It's a lifestyle. So any negative people in my life, I've really just kind of let them go. I've wished them well, and I've really made my bubble tight with positive people. I've kept my atmosphere very light. The type of music, the things I watch, I'm very careful, because my brain can so quickly switch to a thinking that isn't fun, right? It's sad and it's annoying. And so really keeping that mindset of taking care of yourself. One thing I struggle with even today is I constantly am such a people pleaser. So I'll tell people yes, 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 and I'll overburden myself. But what I have to remember is, at the end of the day, if I have nothing to give, then I'm not really helping anyone. So it's important to have that communication with your friends and family. Hey, I've overbooked myself, or I'm having one of those days. I think letting your family know when you're going through a funk is really important as well. So for example, when I feel it with Eric, I'll just say, hey, I can feel myself going there. Or he'll just wake up and he'll know. I mean, he's just like, wow, this is not the same woman that was here last night. Because, it does change you for a moment. And during that time, you just kind of have to get through it. But I think it's really important to open up so people are understanding and supportive.
Yeah, and talk about your physical activity and how that helps you overcome.
Sure. So I've always been an athlete, but I think that it's very important, because when you work out, right, what happens to your body when you work out? Endorphins. Yep. And what do endorphins do? They make you feel good, right? And so it's like, if you're someone who has anxiety and depression, really think about the things that cause those, or that are triggers for anxiety and depression, and let them go. Like if your work life is really just getting at you, simplify it, or maybe even consider switching careers, because again, it's such a small amount of time that we have on this planet. So you do want to make sure your time is purposeful and that you're happy. And you want to be able to give your friends and family the best version of yourself. So set yourself up where you're not going to fail by, again, having that surrounding, sorry, I've lost track of my question.
Just how exercise has helped you over.
Oh, exercise, right. Yes. A couple of things why I take the exercising why it's such a big deal to me is I want to be able to keep up with my kids. It's very important to be active with my family, but also because of the endorphins, it really keeps me happy. There have been times where I have been in a funk, and then I went outside and went mountain biking and came back, and I didn't want to do it, right? Everyone's had those days where like, I just don't have the energy, or I don't feel like doing this. But just remind yourself that it will help. Turn on some good music and go. And then when you're done, you'll know why. Because every single time I do that, it's like, okay, that was all I needed. I just needed to get some good endorphins into my body. I need to be out in the sunshine, and just having some time for yourself is really important as well.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us a little bit about how you became such a tenacious person. What got you to be this fighter that you are? Because I know your personality, and you're very you do have a very optimistic outlook on life, even though there are days that you have this overcome you. But that isn't who you are at the core of who you are. But you're an adventure seeker. You're willing to take risks. You do hard things. Yeah. Why is that? What is it? Where does that come from?
Thank you. That's so kind. I think part of it is a little bit my personality. But I think the other thing is I've realized very young that I had two ways to go about life. And that was to a glass half full, glass half empty kind of idea. And I think, I think we forget that we have so much more control over our life than we'd like to think. I mean, clearly life's going to happen the way it is. And for those who know me, I lost multiple family members this year, and I've had tons of things come up that are very unexpected. But as experiences happen, it always comes down to this. How are you going to choose to move forward with it? And what are you going to make the experience about? Are you going to learn from the experience, or are you going to feel sorry for yourself? And I think having a positive mindset can really help get you through those dark, gray times. You can write yourself notes. You can talk about it with friends. But I think that it's really important to realize that what things you put into your body, what you do with your time, who you spend your time with, is really, really your choice. And I think people need to make that. People really need to recognize the fact that they have more control over their life. And if they're unhappy with something, figure out what's making them unhappy and adapt and change it. And it doesn't mean that I don't have bad things or things that make me unhappy happen. In fact, I just take the negative things that happen to me in a positive way. And I just try to always look at the learning lessons, because life is not like this, right? It's not like good life, right? Life is constantly up and down, up and down. It's just the way it is. As soon as you can recognize as soon as you allow yourself to understand, okay, it's going to be up and down, it's less of a pain when it's down, right? Because everybody enjoys the ups. But maybe call it like yin and yang. I have this thing where it's like without happiness or without positivity and negativity meet each other in order to really appreciate both sides. So right. As soon as you recognize that these things are not bad things, aren't bad things, and good things aren't good things, actually all of it's just a learning lesson, and just ride that wave, your outlook will change. And so there's lots of books. I think it's really important. There's a saying, the top 5 people you spend your time with. It's huge, because if you're around people who think like this and have these types of discussions, your life will change drastically. I know when I moved to Spokane, I started being very selective on the type of people I would spend my time with. And I recognized having a lot less stress because of making that choice. And even moving to Spokane, living in a place where there isn't insane traffic like Seattle, a place that is cost efficient, a place that does have 4 seasons and beautiful summers. So I think really setting yourself up so you don't fail is important.
That's so true. I mean, I did a video called the 7 Revelations video, and in those 7, one of them is surround yourself with the top 5 people in your life that are going to help up level your life. So finding people that are of a higher, almost learning point in their life, because I don't say they're a higher status, because it doesn't, that sounds bad, but it's like they've been through more, learned more, they're more wise in some ways, that I can reach for that versus reaching down all the time and trying to pull people up, because that can be exhausting. Although we will have.
Yeah, and you're right. And it doesn't have to do with status at all, because at the end of the day, it's appreciating people's gifts, right? So you could come from nothing and really learn to have a positive outlook. And so I would want to be friends with someone like that, because I want to have that type of thinking. Or maybe I have someone who's a friend who's a doctor and maybe their status is different, but I don't think the status actually has anything to do with it. I think it's more or less the gifts that people have that they can teach you with, because we all have qualities. And so when you're around someone who has a strength in that quality, it just helps kind of coach you to get better as well. And it kind of keeps you from getting lazy.
Right. So what goals do you have right now in your life as you look forward into 2020? It's almost 6 weeks until the new year.
I know, it's crazy. Well, I'm wrapping up my reign here, getting ready for the next title holder. But I'm going to be very busy with the community, because it really does bring me a lot of happiness. That's how I balance my anxiety and depression, is just staying involved. And then my daughter, she's 7 now. My fiance and I will probably get married, have a baby, kind of do that whole thing. But I just want to continue to work with women, especially just because I love seeing women empower each other. And I love to see these topics that have been really taboo in the past be brought forward and discussed. And so for me, I'm probably just continuing to stay active. And I try to talk less and lead by example. So just kind of being out there and inviting people to come with me on adventures, or inviting them over for dinner. Simple things, even a compliment or a smile can really change someone's whole day, and kind of keeping that in the front of your mind, that if you don't have time to make a difference, realize that something nice or a text or smile doesn't actually take much time at all. And if you don't have time to do community service and do that, there are people like myself who are out there doing that, who definitely are always looking for financial support or support in other ways that we can do it, because we do have the time. So there's always ways to get involved in a positive way. And I think at the end of the day, those positive things will make you feel great. So I always suggest doing something.
Yeah. And what has been your, I guess, biggest, most positive or insightful, whatever you want to call it, moment in your reign as Miss Washington 2019?
Oh, goodness. I think the thing about pageantry is there is also a stigma where people think it's just a beauty competition. And while I can't argue that all of these women I hang out with are physically beautiful, I've always been so pleasantly happy, surprised how their inner beauty matches their outer beauty so much. I think at the end of the day, the reason a lot of these women join the pageant system is to have that connection with other women around the state, but also to give themselves a voice and a platform to go after things they maybe wouldn't do on the day-to-day. So, for example, I have a huge fear of public speaking. Yeah, I constantly am being asked to MC events. And while I never really want to do them, I do them because each time it gets a little easier and I become a little bit more smooth. And I think that people should really not let their fears and anxieties get in the way as much as possible. I went cave climbing a couple weeks ago where I had to climb into this little dark hole in the ground. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. This is scary. I don't want to do this. And I did it and I had the best time. I've been afraid of snorkeling. I went snorkeling a week ago in Mexico, and I have yet to experience something that I was afraid of doing, went and did it, and then come back and not been pleased or happy with myself. So I think, if you are looking for some sort of purpose, because again, purpose is what brings you happiness, whether you get involved with your church or your community or you join a pageant system, I think it would be good to have that part of your life, because while it may seem daunting, like more work, there is so much more positivity that comes back and so much learning. I mean, that's exactly how we got to meet, right? And so
Right.
it opens a lot of doors, and I think that's very important.
Absolutely. I've always found for myself that doing hard things leads to the next best thing.
Totally. Yeah.
So it's just really inspiring women to go out and to face their fear and do something that seems really hard. And
Absolutely. And just to be each other's cheerleaders, you know, like, you know, I see some girls and all they want to do is modeling, and maybe that's not all I want to do, but it's like, good for you. Like, they're doing something that makes them happy. Or maybe you see some women who are just donating every weekend. You know, try really hard not to compare yourself to other women, because that is completely against the whole idea of what's going on here. I think what you have to do is just give your sister the benefit of the doubt and know that we're all in different places in our lives, and we're all doing the best we can at that moment. And that moment does not decide who they are, right?
I think that's so important to keep in mind, is that, are you doing your best with what you have? And that's all that you can ask of yourself, really. Because we're all given different gifts and talents and things that we're meant to do here. And as long as we're doing them to the best of our ability, that's all that is asked of us. And if we feel like there's more for us out there in the world, then go get it. Like, yeah.
Right. I think one thing that's so important, though, is like, if you want change, don't sit around and wait for change, because I can guarantee you it won't happen. Right. You know, if you don't like the people you spend your time with, or if you don't like your job, or you don't like the way you look, or you don't like that you haven't had a chance to read that book, make time for these things. And so one thing that I did, that my mom had told me, make a vision board. And for the longest time, I thought, I'm not doing that. That's so cheesy. And I did. And on that vision board, I just put things where I wanted my life to be, how I wanted it to look like. And then I just focused on that vision board. And it was crazy. These things that I was hoping that would happen for years were happening overnight, because the only difference was I was actually going through and making them happen instead of just thinking about them. So, you know, if you're at home and you're thinking, I don't like these things about myself or my environment, change it, because you can. And even though it might be daunting, start with the first task. And, you know, these things don't happen overnight. I didn't just wake up and I wasn't good at a sport, right? It takes falling down and getting back up and going and making the time. And so just remember that your life, for the most part, is really what you make it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a vision board. I'm looking at it right now. Up to the
yeah,
and it's also my screensaver on my phone. I don't know if you can see.
That's so great. You know,
one thing, all the hundreds of notifications, but
you know, one thing that's also so important with the vision board. I just had my friends over, and we had some lanterns, and on the lanterns we were writing things that we wanted to go after this year and things we wanted to let go. And I think, again, that's so important, right? Like, don't let just the things you want in your life happen stay in your head. Talk to your family about it. Talk to your friends about it, so that way they can ask you about it. How is that one thing that you were wanting to do, right? Because otherwise what we do is we just don't prioritize it, and then it doesn't happen, and you're right back to this crazy routine of, my life is just never changing. I'm unhappy with myself. So, you know, for anyone who has mental illness or struggles with it, you know, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. Yeah.
From the audience, actually.
Okay.
So Amy Robinson asks, she first of all says, Keiran, thank you for being so open and sharing your experiences. What kind of foods do you avoid that you have found can impact your anxiety and depression?
Well, luckily, my nutritionist across the screen here, you know, I think the most simple thing to say is to stay away from anything that's processed or anything that's unnatural. Anything that's really hard on your body is going to really slow down your brain being able to get the way I describe it to my daughter when I describe healthy food and unhealthy food is like, think of yourself like a vehicle, right? You want to put really good gas in your vehicle so you can drive. But if you're putting water in the vehicle, which is not gas, it's not nutrition, what's going to happen? The vehicle's it's not going to work. And so a lot of things that I do that kind of help me is I only eat healthy foods I like. If I don't like it, I don't eat it, because I don't want it to be a pain to be a healthy eater. Another thing I'll do is I'll pre-make meals and freeze them. So on those days that I'm super busy or don't have the time or energy, I can just nuke something. We talk about food a lot in our household, like what foods do you like? And we get creative and we make our own dishes. So those are all important things. I think just making food less of a pain, I suppose. So like in our society, we've gotten so used to eating fast and just grabbing fast food or picking up things from the grocery store because they're colorful and bright. But I think as a society, we just need to kind of simplify it and just eat really good, wholesome food that you like. And I understand that it can be expensive for people, but I know that they have like the top lists of foods to absolutely stay away from. And there's little things that you can do. We don't eat a lot of carb, like we eat a lot of sweet potato in our house. We eat a lot of chicken and fish and vegetables. So we stay away from like what we call filler foods. So we don't do a lot of rice or pasta. We really only use carbs if they're like a really healthy carb. And the reason why that's so important, again, going back to the vehicle idea, is if I'm going to go out mountain biking or skiing, if I eat McDonald's or I eat something homemade, the outcome of my day is going to be very different because of the fuel that was in my body. And therefore, my mental well-being will either be very exhausted and mad at myself and disappointed and, shameful, right? That's where your head goes sometimes when you eat these foods, or you feel good. Like that was a really good meal. I feel healthy. I've got energy. So what you put into your body is massive. What you put into your body, whether it be food, visually, sound, the whole thing. If you struggle with mental illness, be extra, extra careful and kind to yourself.
Right. And I just did a live call for my private coaching group, and it was on inflammation in the body. And the brain, when it's under inflammation or fire, is going to be put out with water or extra inflammation. And I'm imagining that contributes to some depression and anxiety, and the brain being constantly under fire, but also
Absolutely.
the body. And it's the processed foods, it's the sugar, it's the high carbohydrates that are filler foods that don't give us nutrition, but they just give us this excess energy that gets stored as fat. And that can create a whole host of hormonal problems, let alone chemical imbalances too. And as you and I've talked about before, gut health related to mental health is this whole new phenomenon we're just starting to learn about. If 2007 was the first time they ever mapped the human genome, the gut microbiome, we've only known about it for 12 years. And so we have a lot to learn about mental illness and its effects. The direct correlation to the body and eating and what we can do to help that. So
yeah, food is huge.
Yeah, totally. Definitely.
Fantastic.
Well, Amy says thank you. And another Amy Jackson, she said, when you were mentioning about the kids and seeing the social media stuff, she said, couldn't agree more. Great point, especially for our youth. They need to understand the concept of fake reality. Very true.
Oh, that's such a good point. And this was Amy who asked the question?
Yeah.
So Amy, I'm so glad you said that, because I think as a society, so social media is something that we just have taken off with, right? But we haven't really thought about the consequences. We're just like, this is fun and convenient, which it is. It's a great way for information to be shared very quickly. So there's tons of positive things about social media. We use it all the time. But I think educating children and educating people in general on how to use social media in a way that doesn't affect your mental health in a negative way is very important, right? So there's a couple things. Maybe you have those people who are always posting about politics or negative things. That's going to mess with your head. If it makes you feel bad about yourself, you can just unfollow it. And you don't even have to defriend, just unfollow it. But I also think having those conversations with young people about what social media truly is and getting their minds ready for what they're about to take on pretty much every day, right, for their lives. Because we're on our social media all the time, really being mindful of what it truly is. And so for me, a while ago, I went through and I only have people on my social media that I truly care about, or they bring a lot of positive information to my life, and everything else is just unfollowed. And And I think that is very important to do because it can affect people. So when people like unfollow me, I never feel offended, because if I'm doing something that's making them feel even a smidge not so great about their own lives, I respect that, because at the end of the day, you've got to do what's good for you. And like I said earlier, we're all kind of in different places in our life. So just giving people the benefit of the doubt that they're doing what's best for their well-being and being respectful of that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Our mutual friend, Keiran and I have a mutual friend named Keiran Reynolds, and she sent me an article from Forbes magazine called "Social Media Shown to Be Worse for Girls' Mental Health Than Boys." And in it, a study was done on 10,000 14-year-old people, and it basically correlated the more time on social media meant the more they dealt with depression. And so it's still just being studied. We talked about the gut health. It's all still so new, yet the second leading cause of death is suicide. We need to put the studies on warp speed and get it out to the masses, because parents need to realize that their children's time on their phone is truly leading to the depression that they are feeling, or at least it's a big part of it. Yeah, that time in front of a blue screen all day long outside of school. I think I said something one time to a friend of mine, and it made a lot of sense, or I was talking to my kids about it, I can't remember, but when I was a kid, we got home from school and you could detach yourself from all your friends. You just didn't have that ability to be in touch. And then these kids come home and it's 100% still all around them, their friends. There's no escape from that unless they choose to put it down, but because it's so addicting, it's hard to do that.
Right. So like any kind of, so there is an addiction to it, right? Because it also gives us a lot of excitement and endorphins when we see likes and things. But I think treating social media like anything, like alcohol, right? A drink can be something that's enjoyable, and it can be something can be incredibly damaging if it's used the wrong way, right? I'm just using alcohol as an example. But I think we need to look at social media that way. I'm not anti-social media because I use it and I see it and I know that there's a lot of positivity, but you have to be honest with yourself. How much am I on this? Am I really looking at other people's things? So for example, myself, I only allow myself to go on my phone, to go through my social media, I think once a day for 45 minutes. And there's apps that can hold you accountable for your time, making rules for your kids. I think really turning off the screen and getting outdoors is helpful, because the problem with mental health and social media is when you don't feel like you have any energy, social media is so easy because it doesn't take a lot of energy, because anytime you want, you can just turn it off. So it becomes kind of this crutch for a way of socializing, which limits the going out and actually getting coffee, or going out and meeting up with your girlfriend to go and do yoga. So what does that do? It's keeping you from being active. It's keeping you from getting outside. It's making you compare yourself to other people's lives. So if it's causing that type of harm, I think it's important that you're honest with yourself and really limit yourself. And so, like I said earlier, I have a rule for myself about how often I go on. And for me, I use it more or less as a tool to show people what different events and things that I'm doing, but I really don't try to live on there.
Right. Yeah. But limits is huge. Like the iPhone will tell you how many hours you're on social media and which sites you're on and how many minutes you're on each site. And as a parent, you can set limits for your children, and so that they can't be on a specific site for much longer than an hour or two or 5 minutes, however you want to set it. Yeah. But it certainly makes it easier. But it's important to have the conversations as to the why behind what you're doing as a parent, and not just do it without talking to your children about it, because they're smart. They know that this stuff is out there. They see kids all around them every day struggling with all sorts of things, from identity to depression to whatever they may be struggling with, and they know. So just
and as a parent, you have to be a good example, right? I don't know if you've ever had your kid be like, "Hey mom, put your phone down," but if you're hearing that, really listen, because we all tend to do that. We tend to get caught up in our phones because we have so much work. There's so much multitasking. It's so convenient. But really don't let that take away from your family time, because your family time is what's really important for your mental health, your well-being. And then the other thing that I just want to say about social media before we drop this subject is what you post about yourself or your family or kids doesn't go away. And so one day when your kids are in history, learning about us is going to be a lot different than it is for us to learn about our grandparents, because our grandparents didn't have social media. But say my great grandkids want to know about who I was, everything's going to be there for them. And so it's really important that whatever you're posting or how you're representing yourself, know that generations down the road will have access to this information. And also things that you post of your children, right? For making sure that you post things that you're comfortable with everybody looking at, because while we like to think it's just a small group of people, once you put it out there, you put it out there. So really making sure you stay away from anything that could harm your own children.
Yeah, very true. I have another question from the audience. Wendy Lee asks, how can you help a friend that doesn't want help?
That's a fantastic question. And I have thought about it for a long time. And the best thing I would say is two things. One, to lead by example. So be active and healthy and positive that yourself. It's surprising how just being a certain way can really rub off on people. Whenever I've had friends that are struggling with something, it's much easier to be understanding and lead by example than to just to throw it at them. Anybody who has mental health issues does not need more pressure and stress of disappointing you. And in fact, that's something that I struggle with all the time, is I will get depressed for being depressed because I'm disappointing someone. So it's a cycle that's really hard to go away. So going back to the photographer, I had a photo shoot. I felt like death that day. And then knowing that she was affected by what I was doing, I was feeling even worse, which was putting me even into a heavier depression. So I think when you're dealing with people who have mental health, making them feel guilty or bad is not going to be beneficial to them, because they're already being much harder on themselves than you even understand. So the best thing to do is to be very positive and lead by example, but also invite them out to go and do things that will put them in a good mood. So, you know, or saying, hey, I'm going to come over and bring your favorite movie and let's get some treats or let's talk. You know, you can do things in a subtle way, or maybe you have a really straightforward friendship and maybe you can just come out and say, I worry about you, right? Is there anything I can do for you? What do you need from me? When you go through these moments, what is it that you need? Sometimes just bluntly asking. And so it's not so black and white. It's different from person to person. You kind of have to read the person you're dealing with. But leading by example and being available are the two things I would suggest, and really not making them feel worse.
I love that. Thank you. It's true. It's just not a cookie cutter. Nothing
It's
is.
not cookie cutter. And I think that's why mental health is such a difficult one, because you know, what I experience and what someone else experiences is going to be different. But I think at the end of the day, the overall goal is the same. And that is just humanity taking care of each other and being loving and supportive and recognizing that we all deserve to have a decent life and to give each other that. And so to be patient and loving and kind and understanding is the best thing we can do.
Yes. Something I recently learned from two kids of mine in the last month who are both struggling with something pretty intense. And as a parent, you want to come to their rescue and you want to solve the problem, right? But both of them were like, hold up, stop. I don't want your help. I just want your support and love. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we need to remember with our friends too, is and our spouses and our kids, is that if they're coming to us in a crisis mode, and first of all, thank them for trusting you, mm-hmm. and just be a good listener and hold them tight, love them and just be there for them. I think is a really good first step in that direction of being able to help them, because it builds trust.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people don't want to open up is because they don't think you're going to understand. And so they don't want to burden you with anything. And so there is that frustration of people who have mental health issues not opening up because you're not going to get it, right? So instead of trying to get it, sometimes just bluntly asking, what is it that you need from me? What do you feel like you need right now? And just asking, because again, what my bad day looks like might be different for the next person. My father didn't have suicidal thoughts on the level that I did. It's just how my mental health is. And so for me, it takes a lot more work to keep my mind from going there than it does for him. And again, that's why it's so difficult. It's because everyone's kind of it's like a scale, right? Everyone's at different spots. And part of it might be genetic and part of it might just be lifestyle. And lifestyle, we have a lot of control over, but who you are, right? That takes a little bit more discipline and getting into your mind and thinking, okay, what is it? What's going on and how do I fix this? And taking the time to have that. So one thing that we do in our home is during dinner, we always talk about the highs and lows for the day. We don't just talk about the highs because that's not life, right? Well, life is not always positive. It's important to talk about the lows. And I think just having it where your kids are comfortable, having that type of conversation in a casual way is the best thing that you can do for your kids. Just checking in, making sure, if you're worried about your children, just making sure that their support system and their friend group is very healthy and making sure that they're with good people, because that will really, really help them in the direction it goes.
Yes, I think not only may they not come to you because you don't understand, and you've touched on this prior to saying that, is that they may feel you're going to be disappointed in them when they do come to you. So having that openness of conversation with your kids and spouse and anyone in your group, friend group, that you are empathetic and you understand, and that you're not going to judge or have some kind of expectation that you're placing on them, that if we throw our expectations kind of out the window of who we think they should be or what they should be doing, then
there's already so much pressure.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's pressure from friends, there's pressure from parents, there's pressure from society, and then we ask ourselves why suicide's happening the way it is. And it seems very simple in the sense of, I think people just want to feel needed. And I guess that's why it's so important that people put themselves in a position of purpose, because purpose is what brings happiness. On days that I feel really depressed, one of the things that I force myself to do is to go and do community service, because if I go and feed homeless people, I can guarantee you by the end of the night, I will feel much better than I did going into there. Because it just makes me feel like, okay, I can give back to society in a positive way. There is purpose for me. I am important. When you're depressed, you feel very negative, you feel ashamed, you feel embarrassed, and it's very much that setting. So really making sure that you're in a good surrounding and putting yourself in a good surrounding is huge.
Yeah, great point. Just getting into action, even though you don't feel like it.
Yeah, I think, one thing that really helps is when you're going through funks, maybe diary or write something to remind yourself, hey, when you're going through this, do these tasks and see if it makes a difference. And I can probably guarantee you it will. It does help, because while staying in bed is all I really want to do when I'm going through it, and all I want to do is sleep because you have zero energy, it's hard on your family, and it's not fun for you either. And so just kind of reminding yourself that today is just my bad day, and tomorrow will be better, or maybe it won't be tomorrow, maybe it'll be in a week or a month, but just recognizing that life doesn't sit still, it's constantly moving. And so don't get too comfy when it's too exciting, and don't get too comfy when it's too sad.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny, we had 3 Amy's listening in today.
It's the Amy morning.
So I have another Amy that she's not asking a question, but she's saying thank you so much for the wonderful podcast, so helpful in many ways, and not just for myself, but for many people. And that you had a lot of great points, and the whole interview was awesome. So we really appreciate being here today. I think we should end on that note, because everyone that came on felt like they were really blessed, and I know this recording will bless many more people.
Well, it feels, the gift is really mine, because for those of you who do have mental illness, you'll recognize that when you help people and you open up, it really helps answer a lot of questions for yourself. And so, keep talking to each other. Feel free to reach out to me if you ever want to chat or anything like that. And just recognize that a lot of society is going through it much more than we even know, because there's still that stigma. And so that's the goal, is just breaking it down a little bit at a time.
Absolutely.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a blessing, and thank you everyone for your time as well.
Yes. Well, thank you, Keiran. We really appreciate you so much.
Fantastic.
We'll talk to you probably tonight.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, friend.